Hello and welcome to Dark and Stormy Book Club. Today we visit with Cynthia Surrisi. Enjoy. I'm Ann Dart.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
We would like to welcome to the program one of our oldest, not oldest in age, but oldest in support, our oldest patron, Cynthia Surrisi, and she has two books coming out in the next month, and they are the unofficial Lola Bay Fan Club, and that is a middle-aged, coming of age, I would say, story. And then we have an older book, well, not older in age, but in time, The Bones of Birka, Unraveling the Mystery of a Female Viking Warrior. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here and see you again.
Wow, you've been busy.
I guess during the pandemic, I just hunkered down. And this is what happens. And I had the good fortune of having two books come out at the same time from two different publishers. So a little bit hard to promote them when they're so different. But I'm not complaining. I'm perfectly happy.
So the first one, is that a middle grade?
Yes, it's
Okay.
middle grade. And I like to think of it as emotional suspense.
Oh,
Yes, it is.
very cool. And then the second one is still fiction, or
It's
is that-
nonfiction.
It is
nonfiction. In
nonfiction.
fact, I have my
Interesting.
author copies here.
Oh, okay.
It just came this last week.
That's beautiful.
And I got a Junior Library Guild Gold Seal Award. So kind of happy for that.
Is that also focused then towards the middle grade?
No, that's young adult. If they call
Young
it
adult.
12 and up, you'd
Oh,
have
okay.
to be a pretty savvy middle school student to read it. But yes, you could.
Okay.
But it transitions up to adult
Oh, okay.
because it's got some big concepts in it.
Oh,
It's got a lot of science, a little technology, a lot of social science, archaeology, osteology, genetics.
Do you have a
No.
background?
No, I don't. I now do.
Oh, very cool.
But I was a lawyer
Oh,
for
alright.
many years. And when I
What
stopped,
drew you to the Vikings?
I went to a lecture at the American Swedish Institute in Minneapolis, and they had a traveling exhibit about the Vikings and a lecture about the Vikings. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I'm just going to go. And I printed out the bios of the two lead archaeologists on the papers that were published. And I read the papers and I realized that these were the people who DNA tested a 1,000-year-old grave, and it had been labeled as the most famous male Viking warrior. And they found it was XX. So they wrote not one, but two academic papers on this grave. And I was so completely fascinated by the fact that everyone thought since 1878 that this was a male. They assumed there was a deception. Of course, it was a male. The grave was full of weapons, all weapons, no jewelry, nothing else. And it had to be a male. They didn't even think about it. And then all of a sudden, in the 1970s, some osteologists, women, started examining the bones and saying, hey, this looks female to us. And it wasn't really until 2017 that they did the DNA testing. And, that's pretty conclusive. So they published a paper, and the title of their paper says something to the effect of, "We found a female Viking warrior." And that set the archaeological world on fire. Part of it was my interest in, oh, cool, a female Viking warrior. But it was really more what happened after they published the paper that began to intrigue me. And I thought, I'm going to write about this for young adults. And they were gracious. I interviewed them, and I was inclined to believe their theories. And they kept saying to me, look, we get it that you are favorably disposed to our theories, but we urge you to interview our critics.
Oh,
Ah,
And they
that's
gave,
interesting.
That's
yeah, they
very
were
interesting.
terrific. And they gave me the names of all the people, and you could read it. And the critics were all over the blogosphere. So I kind of sucked it up, and I started contacting all these people and interviewing them. And I began to understand several things. One is that the academic peer review world has evolved in the era of the internet. Historically, people would write an article that was for peer review, publish it in a journal, and people who wanted to agree or disagree with them would also write a peer review article, and it would have scientific data, and it would be backed by theories and lots of citations. But what happened in this case is that people just went crazy on the internet with blogs and posts. And I mean, there were, from the time they put it out, within 24 hours, hundreds of thousands of people screaming about this. For some reason, couldn't bear the idea that a female Viking could be a warrior. Notwithstanding current entertainment world,
right.
there was a lot of complaining about it. And so they turned it into a, you must be wrong. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to DNA test. You use the wrong lab. There had to be another body. There was,
Oh.
all these reasons. So they had put only the DNA testing pretty much into the first paper. And they thought, well, we just better go back and explain this to the world again and more thoroughly. And so they did it. They did a second paper, and they went through the whole history of the dig. What happened when it was found and how it was preserved, and all the different iterations of its moving through boxes during the war, and meaning the bones and so on. All the people who repeated over and over and over and over again since 1878, warrior, 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 warrior. And the only thing that they changed in this set of facts was the sex determination.
Oh.
So like the minute they find a sex determination that's different, all of a sudden it's not a warrior anymore.
Yeah.
Isn't that the
So
lane?
yeah, so that became a great fascination for me, to explore that, to understand why people were critics of it. One of the criticisms was, you archaeologists have declared her essentially to be cisgender.
Oh,
You've said she's female as a sex determination,
right.
but to be a woman or a man is more of a gender issue.
Okay.
And they felt there were critics, the trans community and others, who said, you don't have any way of knowing how she, or I say she because that's what they called her, presented herself to her community. You really don't know, whether she was
Yeah.
trans. You don't know whether she dressed as a male for battle. You don't know whether the Vikings were gender fluid. You don't know.
I know. So I'm not so much Viking, but in pirate history, there are lots of women who would dress and present as men and stay on the ship. And I've always thought, how on earth did you pull that off for like, more than a month? Because at some point you're going to have some issues that you're going to have to explain to somebody. But we don't know what they were like. You can read all the stories, but there were a lot of women during that time that would pass themselves off as men because they weren't allowed to fight. Even in
Right.
Lord of the Rings, if you watch the one, where she says, I am no man, and that's fiction, but she's riding along as a man because she would not have been allowed to go as a woman.
And I do have that chapter on that.
Oh, very cool.
And there's a fairly good study of Danish women during a certain period doing this. Joan of Arc,
Yes.
right? And then the Civil War, women did it. It's well known that they tried to get in and they would go with their brothers and try and go. So there is a history. And, women right now fly in combat, combat helicopters. I mean, women wanting to be in battle is not new.
No.
And what they have done to accomplish it is a variety of things. Which female people did this and how they chose to do it and why they chose to do it. We may be able to know something about those who are doing it today because they can tell us, but we really don't know anything about someone 1,000 years ago. And that led me to this whole discussion of the emergence of gender archaeology. I spoke to some Viking gender archaeology experts,
Interesting.
and they talk about gender bias in archaeology and how when archaeology was emerging during the Victorian era, they were imputing to people they were unearthing their particular set of values. So if they found things that they associate with female, they would just declare that grave, however old it may be, oh, that's a woman or a female. And they didn't even draw distinctions. They conflated gender and sex. So there's a lot to be said about the whole study of archaeology, how it's done, and checking bias, and whether you should even gender a grave when you open it. They no longer call graves with weapons warrior graves now. People who specialize in that area call them weapons graves, so as to not lean toward the possible maleness of it. But anyway, the books became quite an interesting study. And for me, it was so much more than a DNA test.
Right.
And for kids in high school, I was hoping it would show them, it would open archaeology up as a possible field, as not something dry and boring.
Right.
It was a fascinating book to read. It really was. I thought, oh, this is going to be dry. But boy, it grabbed me. I would never even attempt to pronounce some of these names in here because they are really tongue twisters. Have you ever been to Birka?
I'm going in June.
Oh,
Charlotte Hedenstierna-Jonson, the lead archaeologist on the DNA testing, who is the expert in Birka, has arranged for me to go to the Swedish History Museum on Monday when it's closed. And they're going to bring the bones and the artifacts down
So
for
you'll
me
get to
to
see them.
examine and to take photographs. And
How
I'll write
exciting.
about it on my website. But
Oh, please
blog about it.
do.
I just get chills when I think about it.
No doubt.
Obviously, Minnesota is known to have a large Scandinavian population, but I'm actually jumping for joy inside because I love to hear that there are hidden things that we know nothing about that women did. And that's a wonderful feeling.
But
So
she was
thank you
not
for
even
bringing this-
close to being the only one they found, right, Cynthia?
Right, they have found others. And one of the questions I raised as sort of a log line for the book was, how many female Viking warriors does it take to make a fact?
Oh,
Very
oh,
good.
Because
I like
that's
that.
catchy.
people keep saying, oh, there's only this one or there's only that
Ah.
one, or there's just a handful. And the archaeologists on the team just say, we're not creating a statistic, we're just telling you about a person.
Yeah.
This is what we found about this person. They haven't even begun to open all the graves that exist, Viking graves that are out there. So who knows how many more there may be. However, they may reflect a similar small percentage of the fighting forces through time.
Right.
It hasn't been a lot. It certainly hasn't been like the TV show The Vikings, where 50% of the population is Agartha,
Well, and then it's very interesting because if you look back, then is that Irish, the Celtic with Boudica? She was fierce, and there have been warriors throughout the ages that are not your standard big, huge man with all of the tools and stuff. And so it's interesting to me that there would be such a pushback when this is not the first one that's ever been found. Maybe in the Viking area, but it's not like there's never been this kind of discovery before, just in a different time period.
I spoke with a Polish archaeologist, Leszek Gardelwa, and he's a specialist on Viking with female Viking graves, and he concentrates on the weapons. And
Okay.
he was telling me about a grave where they had an axe that was not a kitchen type axe. It was clearly a weapon type axe, but it was hand wielded. And they replicated that axe exactly to weight and scale and materials. And then they took a woman the size of the person in the grave, and they hung a carcass of a pig, which is most similar in density to a human.
Yes.
And they gave her this weapon, and they tried to see whether she could wield that weapon in a mortal way against that pig, and it was not hard at all.
Huh.
So it was interesting.
Yeah.
There's
And this is just an off the top of my head question. When they're looking at skeletons, I have, watched some before, some of their discovery stuff in different cultures. And a lot of times they mention like the flare of the hip bones
yes.
are different. So is that not
Yes.
like
The osteologists,
Wow.
starting in the 70s, there was a woman named Beryl Wilkins, and then in the 90s and in the 2000s, 2012, I think, Anna Shellstrom, the osteologists do a morphological examination of the bones, which means they look at them. They
Okay.
examine them visually, they take photographs of them, they do chemical testing on them. They don't do the DNA testing, though. They can, but they don't. But a morphological exam is that. Both of the women, all of the women osteologists looked at the pelvis here and said, that was one of the determining factors. Baby size, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking for a male pelvis, this is not one of them.
No, and they also, one of the determinations, if you sort of dig deep into this osteological exam, is that the bones were gracile, which means slender and thinner. And I had this in the book. You can take the femur, for example, of males on a spectrum from small to large, and you can take the femur of women, examples on a spectrum from small to large, and there's some crossover there. A woman could have a larger femur, a man could have a smaller femur, or a female and a male. But nonetheless, there are qualities about them
Right.
that osteologists are familiar with.
That's just fascinating to me. I mean, the thought of that is both intriguing, and then sometimes there was a grave that they dug up in, I want to say it was England, and it was underneath something that they wanted to build. And so when they went in there, they ended up with all like this graveyard. They were moving the graveyard.
Oh,
to
that
be
was
able-
in
Europe.
Spitalfields in
Oh, it's in-
Okay.
England.
Are all of these people like, really? Why are you digging me up? I've been here for years. Put your building somewhere else.
In England, they go with every layer they go down, they can go all the way down to the Roman.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes way, way back. England's got quite a rich
Soil.
history of layers of culture there.
Right.
Well, every woman wants to be remembered, but to be remembered and argued about 1,000 years later is saying something. But
Charlotte.
For time purposes, I could talk about this all night, but we need to touch on the other book, Unofficial Lola Bay Fan Club. This book put me right back into 7th grade, even though I've been out of there for almost 60 years. It's about a girl named Iris Underwood, and she is going from 6th grade into 7th grade, correct? Or
I think they're going into 6th. It's their first year of middle school.
first year of middle school, right? 6th grade. It's been too long since. And she is not cool. She is kind of geeky, I think, like me, very introverted, unsure of herself. And she has a real small group of friends, but she has one particular friend. and they start middle school, and she's very nervous about it. And her friend kind of diversifies and starts looking for other things in school. And she's feeling very left out. But she and her friend start this unofficial Lola Bay fan club. Well, they start the Lola Bay fan club.
Oh.
And then Melanie Fishface shows up. And she is the cool girl. And she has her gang of the cool girls. Well, Melanie went and became the official Lola Bay fan club president.
Oh.
So Iris and her friend Lisa, they had to become the unofficial fan. And then in comes Dana. And Dana is a piece of work.
Is she a force to be reckoned with?
She is, what would you describe her as, Cynthia?
You know, I fashioned her after all those girls who are in fact mean. I mean, she isn't mean like Melanie Fishface and the crowd. She's self-directed and manipulative.
Yes,
And
very.
she's a year older. Her interest in Iris is really a self-interest.
They
Yes.
definitely exist in middle school. My middle school
Ah.
started 7th and 8th grade. So we didn't do 6, 7, 8. It was just 7 and 8. And it was a whole other world. I went from a very small little elementary school where pretty much everybody had known everyone since preschool. And there was squabbling and stuff, but there was no division. That we didn't have cliques, I guess is what it comes down to. Moved into middle school and I'm like, what is this hierarchy that I know nothing about? Help me out here. Do I have to be anything? Can I just be me? And so I'll be interested to read that. I love those kinds of books.
It is really a good read. It just reawakened all these horrible thoughts I had when I was a teenager.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I got to
Person gonna like me? Am I gonna fit in? Am I gonna be in trouble for thinking this? And oh, I can't say this around this friend because she won't like me anymore. It's just, it was a horrible thing to go through. But
Oh, I'm sorry it reawakened all those feelings, but the goal was to give girls today, or boys, a frame of reference to see how somebody else handles this sort of friend.
Yes.
yeah,
This sort of
So
manipulative
necessary.
friend. And Iris gets walked down the path by Dana.
yes, she does.
And in each circumstance, when she is about to make a bad decision and you just want to say, don't, Iris, don't do it.
Don't do
Do it. She does
And-
it. And
and
all the way
She
to
paid the
point,
price, though.
pays the price for it. But in the end, she does stand up.
Yes, she does.
stands up for right. She stands up
It
for
took
herself.
took a long time to get there, but she
Took a
finally
long
did
time.
it.
You know, we've had some really nice reviews on the book,
Oh,
but the one
wonderful.
that came out yesterday from Publishers Weekly, I want to just read this because I think it really captured so much of what I felt about the book. It says, Iris's vulnerability to Dana's tactics, her genuine remorse for her actions, and her love for Lola are plainly rendered, making for a distinctly real-life portrait of one middle schooler finding her way in a new and ever-changing environment.
That's beautiful.
Very good.
That is really
Excellent.
nice.
And
And
I really,
those are so needed. I often read for entertainment, I just want to escape a little bit. But when I am reading, especially if I am going to read in like the young adult, I love the ones where I'm like, yes, oh, if only I had had this when I was that age. Because look, I love the Babysitters Club, and there were things in there, that they were going through. But I feel like there were some of them that I was like, oh, I'm going to go read my Sweet Valley High instead. Whereas if there's a book that somebody can see themselves in and see what the consequence could be before they get in there, they could go in to that kind of friendship with more knowledge and not so lost.
I think
And-
that's why people were drawn to Nancy Drew, because Nancy Drew, even though it was fantasy and she was a good kid, she still put herself in danger. And
Yes.
I think kids at that age are looking for something just a little bit danger to them is going to middle school. So I think that that's awesome, Cynthia. I have a son who's 23. I think he still has PTSD from middle
Ah.
school.
Mine too. My daughter, she was introduced to a new student they knew had issues. And my kid is not good at saying no. And so this child was introduced to like 5 of them, and the other 4 turned away and left mine with this person. She didn't know how to say I'm done too, because she felt like she was the only one left. She was not going to leave her. And me talking about it's okay, you can leave her, and this is not your responsibility, was completely different than handing her a book and saying, you know what, read that. And she came back and she was like, oh. And I was like, yeah, you just don't hear what I say, which I understand, it's an age. But I feel like if people that age who are either about to go through something or in the middle of something and they read a book like that, it sparks their brain. And in sparking their brain, it's not a lecture, it's an adventure. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And in fact, I had middle grade beta readers for this book.
Nice.
I do for all the middle grade books. And I had 4 girls who were in 6th and 7th and 8th grade. They read the first draft, and then it was during the pandemic, so we did a Zoom. And I sent them a list of 20 questions, and then I asked the question, and they would each go around and respond to it. They had unified responses to Dana, the sort of manipulative girl, unified responses to Lisa, the friend who they're struggling through this relationship, and how they grew up together. But they had, for me, some pretty pointed feedback about the parents. And because I had originally written the parents having a much stronger reaction to Iris's flaws, and they definitely understood how Iris could be walked down this path, how she was redeeming herself, and they wanted the parents to be more understanding.
Oh.
And they could even see one parent being a little less this way and one parent being a little more that way, and how they sort it out, because it's one of the things she does gets the family kind of all goofed up.
Right.
What
were their reactions to Dana's mother?
They just didn't like her. They thought she was
I didn't like her either.
They weren't sophisticated enough to necessarily want to psychoanalyze Dana vis-a-vis her mother or her father. Her father was an interesting guy too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they were more concerned about Iris's parents and how they reacted to these situations that she was in, particularly the one at the end, and whether they were going to let her do something that came her way. So important. I won't spoil it, but you guys, some guys know it. She gets an opportunity to do something that is a once in a lifetime thing. That is like, you would never want your child to be deprived of this opportunity. But her terrible act falls right ahead of this. And so the parents have to decide, what are they going to do? Through the revisions, and then I had some adult readers, I had parent readers, and I had people saying, I'm learning a lot about how I should react to these things. So it actually becomes instructive for everybody in the family, really.
I remember my daughter in high school. I don't remember which book it was, but I do remember her coming to me and saying, I just read this book and I'm not sure about blah, blah, blah. And I was like, all right, well, let me read it. So I read the book and I was like, oh, come on, let's sit down and talk about it. And I love that, because it's so many, I feel, young adult books are read by a number of adults, but you have 2 very different experiences, because you have one filter that is still being created and one that's been in place for a very long time that might just need some cleaning. You can do both with one book. And that's That's awesome. How exciting.
Yeah.
I,
I can
I,
make my 22-year-old read it, and I'll read it, and we'll
She
talk
will
about
love
the
it.
ending.
Yeah.
I
know-
particularly liked the ending with Lisa on the bus. I thought that was perfect. So
Oh, thanks.
Are you done your Quinny Boyd series?
Quinny Boyd had to stop because they aged out. You know, I had to make a decision with my editor when I started to write the second book, The Vampires on the Run. He said, look, you can do this either way. You can do Nancy Drew them and make them the same age and write 50 books.
Forever
Or
18.
if you want to, you can age them through 3 books because that's more fun to write.
Mm,
And they become more sophisticated detectives, and you know, their relationships become more mature, and the relationships with their parents become better. And so I decided I would rather age them, so that when I wrote the end of Side of Sabotage, I can remember closing the computer. It was like 2 a.m. and I just sobbed
Oh,
because I knew,
yeah.
oh, I
like
would,
your child going away.
yeah, I was like, oh, I'm not going to write about high
Well,
school.
How
and,
about writing adult mysteries for Quinny
Wow.
Boyd?
Here's something for you. I did a number of adult short stories, and they're in anthologies. There's one in the anthology that Minnesota Sisters in Crime just put out last year. I wrote it as the origin story to Vampires on the Run.
Oh, neat.
So you will
Very
find that
cool.
in that anthology. You remember how in Vampires on the Run, the 2 people who were the New York Times best-selling authors came to
Yes.
the
Yes.
town, right? Well, this is the story of how those 2 met the vampire
Oh,
who told them all the stories that they wrote to make the New York Times bestseller.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
that's
what a
awesome.
neat idea.
I love
I
it.
love when things come full circle.
Yes.
Are you working on anything now?
I just finished another middle grade sort of social issues novel like this one, and it's just about ready to go to the editor. And it's about a girl whose father, he's an out of work game writer, game creator, video
Uh-huh.
game creator, and her mother works at a credit union, and they live with her grandmother. So they're all 3 kind of unique personality adults in the building that they live in their apartment. And her dad is feeling a lot of pressure to earn some money, and he is very good with video games, but not the best judge of friends.
Uh-oh.
And he gets talked into stealing copper wire and plumbing out of abandoned houses. He
Uh,
doesn't think he's stealing it. He thinks he's salvaging it because his friend has told him if the buildings are abandoned for more than a year, it's free.
Ah,
So it wasn't free, and he gets arrested.
oh,
So
yes.
the book is sort of takes place during the time that her dad is in the county correctional facility. Takes place over about a 30-day period. I like it
Interesting.
very much. I'm very happy with the book.
oh.
Will that be coming out?
Doesn't have a pub date yet.
Oh,
No.
okay.
Be sure and send it to us when it's finished. So
Oh, I will. I will.
we
Well, and I'm doing
certainly will
another.
cover it.
I'm doing another nonfiction, but I'm waiting to see if the publisher of the Viking book is going to take this one. And
Awesome.
so
Oh,
we'll
Awesome.
see.
That's a lot of very cool, good stuff.
You got
going
a
on.
lot of good things going on. You got your trip and you've got books coming out. What more can you ask for? And you got a new puppy.
Yeah.
I got a jumpy puppy. You know, and I have
Oh.
mysteries on my mind. I think once I get these next 2 books kind of under control, I'm gonna turn back to writing a mystery.
Oh,
good,
nice.
good.
I'm missing it. I'm missing it.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
That is awesome. I will look forward to it.
Cynthia, we thank you so much for talking with us and
And supporting the show.
Yes,
Yeah.
Oh,
you
happy
are.
to support the show. I love it. I think you're doing great work.
Well,
And
thank you.
thanks for being interested in what I'm doing.
Yes, and be sure and let us know if something else comes out so we can be sure and give it a blast on the show. And we look forward to talking with you soon. And if we don't, enjoy your trip and be sure and send us pictures.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be putting them up online.
How exciting.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia.
Thanks.
Enjoy the best of your day.
You
It was
too.
nice meeting you.
Nice meeting
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Trivia. Last week's question was, what is author Laura Lippman's family connection to the program The Wire? A, her brother, B, her sister, C, her cousin, or D, her husband? The answer is D, her husband. Lippman is married to David Simon, another former Baltimore Sun reporter, creator, and executive producer of the HBO series The Wire. The character Bunk is shown to be reading one of her books in A Strange City, episode 8 of the first season of The Wire. Lippman appeared herself in a scene in the first episode of the last season of The Wire as a reporter working in the Baltimore Sun newsroom. This week's question is, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil spent how many weeks on the New York Times bestseller list? A, 52, B, 100, C, 150, or D, 216. Tune in next week for the answer. Well, that wraps up another episode of Dark and Stormy Book Club. Next week and for a couple weeks, we'll be going over our visit to Malice Domestic and some of the people we met there and authors we talked to. So be sure and listen for that. And we hope to see you then. And remember,
Life would be boring without a little mystery. Bye.